maybe she introduced me to it a year ago, it could have been. And it was great to see that this work is being done. And sometimes, even when you're in the field as long as I am, you can feel like you're the only one. And you guys have done a fantastic job of connecting people. And I'm so excited and so honored to be here tonight. And as Callie said, this is just the beginning of this conversation. You'll see from the information that I present tonight, there is it goes in so many directions. You could probably get a graduate degree in 10 aspects of it, or just spend your entire life as a parent searching after one aspect of it. So it's a community conversation that is living and breathing and changing for all of us. So I'll just kind of start that conversation tonight, and please feel free wherever you're at in your personal journey to jump in and ask questions about it when we have the time at the end, because it is very personal. I've always said special needs, but also raising a twice exceptional child is never a one-stop shop. And so I feel like I'm always shopping. So let's start shopping and looking for some opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you'll get all of the beauty here. And Callie, if you could give me a thumbs up, do you happen to see the first slide? Excellent, great. Okay, so this is a conversation that was titled From Homeschool to Unschool, Personalized Educational Paths for 2E Students. And my name is Teresa Nair. I do want to focus on tonight the personalized educational path idea of this, and some of the aspects that we'll start to include homeschooling and unschooling. So let's see, let's move forward here. Where does it all begin? I think it all begins when we start to realize that there are choices, and whether that came to you as a need or as a want, choices seem to lead a lot of us down this path of what can we do. So we're looking for choices. The other, oh gosh, it must have been back in April, I want to introduce a story about a family that kind of rang true to me. I saw this story on a Facebook group that I'm a part of, and I asked if I could share it, and she said sure. And I wanted to share because it's really close to me as far as it resonated. I looked at this, I saw this post, and she was talking about how it was April of 2020, and she was emptying out her son's backpack. And as we all know, life changed dramatically in March of 2020, and a lot of our kids came home and were a little bit more under our noses than they used to, and we were seeing a lot more, but she hadn't emptied the backpack. And so she's emptying the backpack in April, and she sees this beautiful piece of art, but unfortunately it really kind of struck her in the heart. And I don't know if you can read it or not, but to me it looks like, I used to read a story to my kids by Dr. Seuss called My Many Colored Days. And it looks like the teacher might have been going over that book with this young student. Her son was in second grade at the time. And this piece of art says, "On yellow days, I feel bad and sad. Go away. I'm alone. I'm down as can be." And she sat with this for a few minutes and decided that she needed to talk to her son and find out about this. She knew he wasn't happy at school, but she didn't really understand the extent. And this hit home. And so she went to him and she said, "Bud, how often did you feel this way at school? How often did you have yellow days?" And he said, "All the time, Mama. Every day was a yellow day at school." And she said, I'm sorry to hear that. Now that things are a little different, we've kind of been working at home now. We're kind of working on things you enjoy and doing a little bit more of a homeschooling approach. Well, how many yellow days are you having now? And he said, "Only when I stub my toe." And I thought that was wonderful, because some of us parents who've been in a place where we just felt like we couldn't save our kiddos from one bad day after another. She had found a solution where her kiddo was like, "Yeah, only when I stub my toe." And I was like, oh, just having that lift off your chest and knowing that your kiddo's okay, except when they stub their toe, is good, So this story kind of brought to me this idea of, for a long time, we felt when we were put in that place of how do I help my child at school when they're having these rough and tough consecutive days over again, or we can't find the answers and it's just a struggle. We had two choices. Sometimes it felt like it was black and white, one or the other. How do we make our public school work? How do we make private school work? But tonight I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the reality and how we can kind of sweep that away, and that the reality of it all kind of looks a little bit different. And there are more colors on our palette than we might know of. And with all of those, you can create a masterpiece for your child, or your child can create their own masterpiece. And to whatever degree you choose to use that palette is up to you, but the choices are there. So let's give an overview a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about. So who am I and why am I here talking about this? Well, my name is Teresa Nair, as we mentioned, and a couple of years ago, I had one of my colleagues introduce me to a new client, and I think this is a new client that I was going to start working with. They were down in Los Angeles, and in the email to the client, he referred to me as an out-of-the-box educator, and that kind of made me chuckle because I've been in education off and on for about 20 years. As Callie mentioned, I started in high tech. So I was working in Chicago for Fortune 500 companies, traveling the world, designing multimedia presentations. It was great. And I decided to volunteer in a middle school classroom teaching technology. I don't really know where that came from, but I did. I started volunteering in a middle school classroom. And I realized that I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved working with middle schoolers specifically. And so I went back to school and worked on my master's in the arts of teaching, English degrees. I hit it hard, and I had a wonderful opportunity for several years to work in public and private schools. I worked in one of the best private schools in the nation for several years, and it's focused on gifted students. So I had a great view into these wonderful programs. My husband and I then moved from the Midwest, the Chicago area, here to the Bay Area. And he's in tech, I'm in tech, and we decided, okay, you know what, for myself, I thought maybe I'd give high tech a chance here in the heart of the tech industry. So I went back and started working for companies like PayPal and eBay. And I did that knowingly, not that I was leaving education forever, but one of the things I feel that is important to bring to education and to the experience and the people that I work with, and especially the students that I work with, is the understanding of what they're working towards and what the real world is. Sometimes it breaks my heart if an educator is preparing a child for a real world, but they've never been outside of education. And so I really embraced the idea of wanting to know, what am I preparing my high school students for in this class that we're here 5 days a week and however many hours? What am I preparing my middle school students for? And so I got a chance to work for some high-tech companies here in the Bay Area. And it was a reality check. It was another aspect of what the world is expecting from people, and what industry is and things like that. And so then I went back into education, and I worked here locally at a couple of wonderful private schools. During that time, I became a mother and I am a wife. And so you'll see that a lot of this pathway for myself was non-traditional too. And so we'll see kind of how that fits in. So as I was going through that, in the last 7 or 8 years, I started to work with the homeschooling community. Now, I want to explain to everybody that this is an interesting time, because I did not think I'd be having this conversation, but I think it's important to have this conversation. In March of 2020, things got confused, and I heard a lot of families saying, oh, homeschooling is horrible. Oh my gosh, I could never homeschool. And my son and I had been homeschooling for 2 years at that time, and I thought, oh my goodness, this crisis schooling, what all of us were thrown into, including myself, because my daughter was still at a traditional school, this crisis schooling that we were thrown into in March for children, for families, for teachers, for administration. It is not homeschooling, and it's very important, I believe, to make that differentiation so that we can have a clearer conversation. So like I said, my daughter was still in a traditional school. And so when she came home in March and was going to do her distance learning, we thought, oh, my son and I are like, hey, we got, Avi's home with us, and we'll all be homeschooling together. But it was hard. And I found myself actually spending more time with her than I did with my son. And I was running interference and I was caught up. It was a time of crisis, definitely. But I started to think about, why is it so difficult to help her in this school from home versus my son, who I've been homeschooling for 2 years? Was it just new? And I started to realize that there is a fundamental difference. For those of you that are learning, that your children are learning from home, you're doing what somebody else wants, when they want it, and how they want it. And it's brought into your living space. And that might work for some people. It might be helpful for some people to have somebody tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. Thank you, that's great, I need that. For us, it didn't work. I realized we were homeschoolers. And so the traditional homeschooling idea and foundation is, as a parent, you get to choose what you want to do, how you want to do it, and when you want to do it. So you could choose to do a public school distance learning program, but understanding that when you talk about homeschooling, it's a lifestyle, they like to say, because it changes so much of the experience because of where the foundation of it is. So we're going to talk about kind of the spectrum in between that of distance learning from home and the possibilities there, but also this possibility of the lifestyle of homeschooling, making all those choices, and what that could mean also. So when we talk about homeschooling, we need to remind everybody that every state is different. And that's what's really interesting. There is actually no true homeschooling in California, as I used to think it was, like kid comes home and you start to educate. No, actually, there's a lot of organization that can help you along the way as homeschoolers. And so I wanted to mention, first off, hsc.org is one of the resources that I'm going to talk about tonight. This is the Homeschooling Association of California. It's a volunteer run. It's a wonderful organization. They actually have a Homeschooling 101 meeting in February. I think it's on the 10th, but they've got this quick start guide and they know what they're doing. They are really helpful. They have a support line you can call. And what they do is they can help you organize not only your resources, but the idea of what it means to homeschool in California. So there are 3 of the most popular ways to homeschool in California is to apply for submit the PSA, which is the Private School Affidavit Program, the PSP, which is the Private School Satellite Program, and then the third one that's popular is the Public Independent Study. Now, like I said, each one of these is different, but they're all supported by the state of California. This is how you legally homeschool in California, is by following and going through one of these programs. So the first program, the PSA, is where you as a family or as a mother, however you choose to do it, you make your home, your institution, your itty bitty school is just you and your child or your children. That is the private school that you have formed, and you are the administrator and the director of that, and you will only be educating your children. And you file that with your state, and you tell the state that you're going to be keeping the records that you need to keep. There's information of folders and files and forms you can do to fill those out if you'd like to. But the PSA is quite a popular option right now. And one of the things about that is that, once again, it's the true homeschooling of the parent is in charge, and they can seek as much support and organization and help as they would like or not like. So this is freedom to choose. And let's say you follow this all the way through high school, your child would be graduating, and you would be giving them the diploma from the institution or the private school that you had created. And so keeping the records, creating the program, however you choose and whatever support you choose, is part of the PSA, and there's varying degrees of that. The next one is more of a private satellite program. This is where somebody else has created a private school, and the amount of leniency and opportunities and choices that you have is going to be based on their program, but they usually keep the records and things like that. One of the things we'd like to highlight and say about the PSP is, you'll want to know what private school you're joining. And some of them are faith-based, some of them might have particular curriculums that they use and things like that, but it's another opportunity that sometimes really allows you flexibility, but keep in mind of what that means. And the third one, the public independent study, is a complicated one only in the fact that, of course, everything changed in March of 2020, but this would be like my son is enrolled in a public school. He goes to a charter school, a public charter school called Ocean Grove, and they support us. Now, because of his age, because of the program that we choose, we check in once a month with our specialist, our education specialist. We don't have a particular curriculum that we're supposed to follow, but they'd like us to do science and they'd like us to do math and things like that. So we have a scaffolding that they help us with. And I usually get to choose how we're going to approach that and what we're going to do with that. And as the child gets older, there are more resources, maybe, but what it is more structured. And so they help you take the steps through a graduation program so that then your child would graduate from that public independent study school. Now, what I've heard, and I'm just starting to get more familiar with, is that public schools in the area are starting to wake up on the possibilities of what this can do as far as helping the students in their districts right now. And so I have a friend who lives out in Santa Teresa area, and I believe, I can't remember exactly where it is, but she had talked about how her public school, she would lose her son's quote unquote personal physical place to re-enroll into the classroom if they chose to go in public or in person eventually. But the program that they were putting together to support the homeschooling students that chose to go through this public independent study was actually turning out to be really robust, and she thought it was pretty valuable. So as things are changing right now, I'm not discounting your local public schools. I think it's important to look at them and see how they can help you on this. So what that means, though, is once again, so we've got these options. There are structures put in place. California can help you along those lines, and those programs are there. What makes it different now is we get to choose the resources and how we're going to go about this. And that actually is kind of where things get a little messy. No, I'm just kidding. That's where they kind of get a little exciting. So it can be very different and very colorful for everybody in the way that it looks. So I don't see it as messy. I see it as an opportunity. And so let's talk about what that means. Where would you even start? You know, now that you've got these three possibilities in California, I don't even know what that means, though. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what that means. So the links that I'm sharing with you tonight are a great place to get started, because you could Google every single one of these words that I give you or topics that I give you. But I've done a lot of research and I've helped several clients, and these are good ones. They're not necessarily the end all be all great, but these are some good ones. And so I wanted to point out that you can take a quiz. And this is one from Homeschool On. And this is kind of a good way to start, because what it does is it exposes you to some of the different styles of homeschooling. And so you can literally take this quiz, you start the quiz, and it says things like, I want to do school with my kids, model the value of learning, reading and writing. Yeah, I agree with that. So let's agree with that one. You can also answer, I prefer workbooks. I want to have children working independently. Now, this is where you start to think about this. Oh, I guess I never realized it, but yeah, I think workbooks are great. And I would like my child to work independently quite a bit. So I'm going to agree with that. And there are, as you can see, 32 questions. I'm not sure what their, analog is and how it all gets down to it. But at the end, you're going to fit into one of these categories. And like I said, it's just a place to get started. It's not going to define you, and it's not going to make, who you are for the rest of your homeschooling lives or for the rest of your independent journeying lives. But what it's going to do is it's going to give you some information. So let's say you didn't know it, but you fell into the traditional style. And that gives you a jumping off point. What does it mean to be a traditional homeschool style? Well, here on the side, it'll tell you, well, that probably means that you like little desks and you probably love workbooks and you probably love schedules and planners. You probably make sure that you write down when recess is. And so this is when you enjoy the opportunity of bringing school into your home and replicating that, how it's going to work for your family. You might fall into a traditional homeschooling kind of mold, and that's great. And there are others. So if that doesn't sound like something you want to do, it could be classical. Classical is a very logic-based. I read somewhere that they kind of rule out color, and that makes lazy. They have lots of repetition and studying Latin and grammar and things like that. There's a lot of public speaking and memorizing, and it's a very robust, beautiful program. Most of it is faith-based also. I believe in the Christian faith. There are unit studies, and then there's the unschooling style and the eclectic and Charlotte Mason. So it might be fun to take this quiz and see what it comes up with, but read a little bit about all of them, because it'll then take you on a journey about maybe what's your style? What are you even starting to look for? One of the ones that we wanted to talk about tonight was a little bit of what is this unschooling. Unschooling is probably something that you've heard about. And one of the things that I like to tell my clients and the families that I talk with who do unschool, they talk a lot about how it's more about facilitating. It's not necessarily that you just, let your kid sit on their, phone all day and do nothing. You become a facilitator and figure out how to help your child when they find things they're interested in. I've even had one homeschool or unschooling mom talk about how she would place interesting books on topics that she thought her son would really enjoy. She'd strategically place them around the house. So when he had like downtime or no tech time, and he was just, wandering around looking for something to do, she knew he'd run across some of those books. And if he just happened to kind of express an interest in something, she'd be like, well, what if we enroll in this class? Or how about we do a Google search on this? And so she would kind of start to facilitate that interest and then back off whenever they wanted her to, jump in, and however it leads to be. This is a great source if you're interested in kind of getting to know that style a little bit more. I really like her work. I believe her name is Sue Patterson. I might got that wrong. Maybe it's Peterson. Let's see, it's right down here. Yeah, Sue Patterson. And as you can see, she's got a beautiful site, and there's an FAQ. And if you're going to choose the unschooling route, I would recommend looking into deschooling. I don't know if you've heard of this one yet either or not, but especially if you're going to just really leave the system behind and let your child do what they want to do, or if you're coming from a traumatic experience, if you're coming from a traumatic experience, deschooling is really helpful in this, because I, as a parent, needed to deschool. I needed to get out of the idea of what school had to look like. And my child had to deschool and let go of some of the trauma. So look into deschooling. She has great resources here. She also has wonderful resources on research in homeschooling and unschooling. So as the night goes on, and as my conversation hopefully goes on with all of you, it's going to be about knowing that there's support out there. You're going to be not necessarily recreating the wheel. You're going to be recreating whatever vehicle you want. And there is a lot of support out there to do that. So looking through these and understanding them a little bit more is helpful. She's got great videos. She's got find local groups. She's got guides. So we can start to point you in the direction of maybe a style that you're interested in, or getting to know something a little bit more. Now, my family, so like I said, I might have mentioned my son and I started homeschooling about 2 or 3 years ago when he was having trouble at school. And he was definitely not enjoying the experience. I was missing him. Every morning I would look at him and he'd say, "Mama, do I have a temperature?" And it would just break my heart. He did not want to go. He was hoping he was sick as opposed to going to school. And those kind of things just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And so when we decided to homeschool, like I said, I'd been working in the community for several years. I still felt like I was jumping off into this on my own, but you're not. That's why I'm here. And that's what I'm hoping to help everybody understand is whichever path you choose, now is a really exciting time. So what we chose and what I've kind of found out over the last couple of years is that we are secular, eclectic, somewhat unit homeschoolers. And so what does that mean? Well, the secular means that we're not faith-based. We don't practice through a specific religion. We're eclectic in the fact that I choose my resources from everywhere. I really am a believer that people and children can learn from everywhere, but that doesn't mean I don't buy curriculum out of the box and that I don't have steps and help along the way. That's for sure. I like some organization there too. And I say a lot of times that part of what we do is I get a curriculum that I enjoy, and then we jump off and I pull in novels, and I'll pull in a movie, or I'll pull in a class. My daughter's a big history buff, so she decided she wanted to do the Titanic. So as an eclectic homeschooler, I can now start to pull together some of those things, but then I also keep an eye on standards and where she's at and things like that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's the idea of eclectic. It's taking from a lot of different places. Unit studies being kind of the idea of the unit of the Titanic being that single unit, and how do we make it work? Like I said, I don't fully necessarily do unit all the way, but to each his own. Once you get this understanding of, I have a style, I kind of like the idea of traditional. Tell me, what is California Public Schools doing right now, and how do I find that, and where are the workbooks? And we're going to go through that, and thank you very much. That's great. There are traditional curriculums out there. You can see some of them will be possibly faith-based. You can choose not to use that one. There are that aren't. There are some that aren't. You'll see that there are a lot of places to go once you start to dabble in this, and a lot of things to choose from. Now, as I said, resources are going to be everywhere. I want to flip back and kind of give you guys one little short slide that might help out, because resources might seem overwhelming, but let me give you just a quick summary of these links that I went over tonight. Okay, you can start with figuring out, what does California allow? And that's the hsc.org link. That will help you know what are the rules and regulations around what I can do in California as a quote unquote homeschooler. hsc.org is a good place to start. What kind of homeschooler am I? Here's the quiz link. So if you want to screenshot this and look at it later, or I have a feeling the wonderful Real group will put this together for you guys too, we can get you these links. But what I've done is I've chosen places for you to start on this journey instead of getting overwhelmed with a Google search. These are pretty good places to start and get curious. The secular eclectic academic one that I spoke about, this SEA, they have a magnificent private Facebook group with over 70,000 members. It's amazing. It's extremely active. It's extremely inspiring, but their website is also fantastic. And so is their magazine. They've got you don't have to recreate the wheel in so many ways, and you can just be inspired by a lot of what's out there. I wanted to point out that in the fall issue, they actually have teaching the 2E learner. So the community of homeschooling is beginning to be familiar with and embracing the understanding that we have unique learners. Our twice exceptional children sometimes do well with their own path. And so Kimberly Joseph wrote a wonderful article even in this magazine. So there's representation out there, there's information out there, and we're going to keep exploring a little bit more about that. So what does it mean though? What do I do? Well, usually families come to me and they're ready to figure out what does this look like for them personally. And I want to thank everybody who signed up tonight. Several of you, many of you put responses in the comments and had specific questions. And that was really helpful. So what Callie and Yao and I decided to do was create some profiles of hypothetical students based on my experience, based on some of the feedback and comments that we got in registration. And how would I create a personalized education plan for a twice exceptional student based on some of the comments and feedback that we got? So thank you for being a part of that. So none of the students that I talk about going forward are actual one child. Okay, this is an amalgamation of a lot of different kids. And so I usually start with a family and we start out talking about what are your priorities. As a family, it's really important to know what's important. What do you want for your child? What do you want for your family as a unit? Does it mean both of us in the family are working and we really don't have a whole lot of time, so we want to take our child out of the school system because it's not working for us. We're ready to go full bore, but we need as much support as possible. Okay. Or we would like to make sure that our child maintains bilingual and is fluent within these two languages, and we can make that work too. So it's really this very personalized time to look at what it means for your family. What are your priorities as a family? And make a list and have conversations. One of the conversations I had with my daughter when she decided she wanted to finally homeschool. My son and I have been homeschooling for a couple of years, and she's always had the choice to join us, but she's chosen school and she loved the school she was at. When she did decide to start homeschooling, I was like, okay, well, so what's important to you, sweetie? What are you interested in? What do you want to do? And she said, I want to study history. And I thought, great, okay. So these are important conversations because they can then help us create this unique path. And as a parent, I would also ask, what's working? What is working for your child at school? What is working with any of the extracurriculars that they're doing? What is working and what's not working? And what's not working can be they just can't be on Zoom for 8 hours straight or 6 hours straight, or what's not working is their organizational skills. And so then we start to piece together this, it's not a puzzle because we don't know what it's going to look like in the end. I'd say it's a quilt. We start to piece together these pieces of a beautiful quilt that we don't know what's going to look like, the shape or sizes of all these pieces, but they're all important. And so you start to organize them. One of the main things, I come from a strength-based background, strength-based, talent-focused, important. And so when does your child shine? Dr. Susan Baum, I can remember having a one-on-one conversation with her, and she looked at me and she said, you know, it comes down to when does that child shine? You know, and I think that's wonderful. And I want all of my parents and everybody that I work with to think hard on that and identify it. You know, I can remember thinking my son, I didn't see him shine very much first and second grade, personally or academically. He was struggling, it was hard. But when he was out on the soccer field, he was just lit up, beautiful, happy. I mean, he was in a good place. So how do I build off of that as a mom? How do I build off of that as somebody hoping to find a larger educational experience on the things that make him shine? I also started to realize math made him shine. I didn't know that until we started having conversations. As a parent, though, don't forget what makes you shine. And take time to sit with that question and flush it out and analyze it for yourself, because you don't want to be doing something for several hours a day that doesn't work for you either. So for me, workbooks work every now and then, but we're good conversation havers. We like to talk, and I shine when I have time to research before I sit down, and then time to research together. And so I shine with time. I shine with research. And so finding those things out, because that's necessary then for me to start planning this educational journey for our family. So these are some questions that I would start with. Then the next thing I ask everybody to kind of keep in mind is that look at this picture and think about what this picture means to you. What does it mean to you in general? And what does it mean to you in the idea of possibly education or in your child's well-being? I thought this was a great visual, because a lot of times we forget, and especially in our asynchronous twice exceptional children's journeys. I've been working with gifted children for decades now, and I'm working on my doctorate in twice exceptional cognitive diversity and education. And these asynchronicities play a big role in our journey and in our child's journey. And when that leap is too big, it can stop the whole process. But what could that mean? And so looking at this for me, I see that in some cases we have benchmarks and achievements and timelines and competition, and it can be overwhelming to the point where it's hard to get started on that ladder. It's hard to get started on that aspect. But I want everybody to know that when we recreate a personal journey, we get to start to fill in those extra rungs with what we need, or what our child needs. So, you know what, maybe in the beginning, we need a couple more extra rungs in our path for social emotional skills. And we need a couple extra, maybe just throw in one for OT. And then we definitely need some executive functioning rungs in there too, because we need a little extra of that. And so while other schools or environments might have set benchmarks, set achievements, this personalized path, or whatever path you choose through this palette of many colors, you can start to put in that little extra rung here and there by being aware of it and knowing that you have choices. And so another thing I point out to parents is it's not that your child's not going to make those benchmarks, or they're going to miss those benchmarks. We know as parents of twice exceptional students that it might be possible that they reach that benchmark at the same time, or they might just blow past that, but they might need more time to get to another one. It's that asynchronous experience where we need to put in place a little bit extra. But my child, their math benchmarks, he just blew those out of the water. So one of his benchmarks on a strength base is to get him a mentor. My daughter, we're going to get her a tutor. So it's all of these different ideas, even within the same home, of understanding we'll get to those benchmarks. We will probably do it in a different timeline and with different steps, and that's okay. So the more you're willing to let go on this and kind of let it be, you'll kind of see it come together. So based on some of the feedback, let's create a personalized path for an elementary student who is 2E and dyslexic. They are a big picture thinker, loves math, high anxiety, and in a social, these are in social and in school. So after going through some of those questions, I would start to put together some ideas. And so maybe One of the things I've seen in the past, and this worked well for us as we were going through our elementary, I've heard that an hour per grade for direct instruction up until like third or fourth grade is about right. So as a first grader, you might want to be doing direct instruction with your first grader for only 1 hour. The rest of the day is playing and exploring and going and doing, which is kind of difficult right now, but it still can be done. Trust me, it still can be done. And so it's that idea that you don't have to over instruct. Keep in mind that if you're transitioning into a non-traditional path, that can mean non-traditional hours. As a teacher, I used to say, probably 60 to 70% of my classroom time is classroom management. It's helping kids come in and get settled down. It's making sure everybody's quiet. It's does everybody have their book? Do they not? So a lot of school time can be put in other places. And when you're one-on-one working with your child, you get more bang for your buck. It's more about quality versus quantity. So think about using your time differently and maybe even less time, but to do different things. When I have an opportunity to sit down with my daughter and do one-on-one math instruction, she gets a lot quicker, but we also repeat it several more times. I think that you'll find that these quality times will work better than quantity. So that's helpful for some parents who might be working. You might be able to find an opportunity, and this is kind of for both grades. I know of a family who does a lot of their work in the evening as homeschooling parents. They sit around the table, and instead of doing homework, they do homeschool work. It's 3 or 4 hours in the evening of sitting around, making a plan, going over lessons, homeschooling after their busy day is done. And instead of sitting down to decipher what the school wants you to do, let's sit down and decipher what it is that we want to do and what can I get you going on tomorrow during your day. And well, maybe your nanny's here or a couple classes planned for you. So there are some things we can do and think about using different times. Now, because our student in this scenario has dyslexia, this is also a good opportunity. And one of the things that I keep in mind and help parents understand is when you take out all of those school hours, you now have an opportunity to add in specialists and mentors. And if you have a public school, if you're paying public school or private school tuition, you've got this private school tuition now to use in other areas. And it's helpful then to be able to schedule these things during the day instead of after school when they're just tired and exhausted, and going to a reading specialist is the last thing they want to do at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. So these are things that we now schedule through the day, or you could schedule throughout your day. So that gets us moving on that specific neurodiversity that we can start to structure. And I've seen improvements, and I know that there's some experiences here with different teachers also who've had opportunities to work one-on-one or in small groups with children specifically focused on dyslexia and reading improvement, either through Wharton-Gillingham or the Barton method. And once you get one-on-one or small group and really give that focused time, as opposed to a classroom full of several different reading groups and public school interactions and things like that, that once again, quality can really help your child move forward, and they might make bigger steps and strides with that kind of opportunity as opposed to figuring it out in the public school classroom. Now, these are all just possibilities in a fictitious child as we go forward. Moving beyond the page, I would suggest maybe that, because if this child is gifted, moving beyond the page does a really good job. It's a curriculum that has science and social studies intertwined, which works well. But if we have, let's say, auditory issues, there's a SALIS, which is a program where they have videos that your child watches a video, and they listen to it, and then they can rewind it if they need to. They're asked questions, and then they can rewind it to the lessons. So there's also other things that we could tailor as far as a curriculum that we would put in there. And then Outschool is a great way to bring in and sprinkle in some interest if you have an interest or a talent that you'd like to explore. Park groups and social pods. This is one I can talk to a little bit more if anybody's interested, but these are really good opportunities, and there's more and more of these cropping up, and they become an important part of your child's exploratory world. And so whether it's a park group, which is really popular with elementary students, when we were homeschooling before the coronavirus, there were park groups for every single day, a different park, a different group completely. So it might be that the unschoolers were meeting on Mondays, and more of a traditional was meeting, or classicals were meeting on different. So there's these park groups that meet all around this area. This area is a wonderful place to take a non-traditional path. And so starting to find those, and now finding out how we can work those in, is a new and interesting way. A math mentor. As I mentioned, my son loves math. He didn't need remediation and support in it as much as I wanted to find somebody who would inspire him and help him enjoy math and see math everywhere. And so taking that opportunity to build on those strengths and take that talent to the next level. We didn't have time to do that before, but now we've got some time, and I can find somebody special. And getting out and involving your child. Now, I know some kids are not interested in team sports, have no desire to do a team sport. There are ways to get outside that don't involve team sports. And sometimes, like tennis, I found to be kind of fun for the younger elementary students, because, especially those with anxiety, because you're not necessarily communicating one-on-one with somebody or trying to make it happen, but you can still make a social connection. You're still there with somebody, or maybe a golf group or things like that too. These are outside, very social distance, and at this time we can't necessarily do that. But as we get closer and things start to open up, these are more comfortable ways too, instead of being in a classroom, getting out and getting some fresh air and maybe meeting people in a less anxiety way. Now, these can be done through the PSA. This can be done because the parent decides they're going to do a small private school. They're going to make their own private school. They're going to make the choices. They're going to keep track of things, which is not that difficult. We can talk more on that if somebody wants to know. And this is your choice and how you want to do this. And maybe that's what they look for elementary school, and that's what they're going to do. So maybe this is a PSA choice.
Teresa?
Yeah.
I just ask you a question that I'm curious about personally. Is this looks incredible. I wish all of my kids had this. How do you have the time to organize and manage this and get the kids to all these different things when you're working?
That's a great question. And for me, and for a lot of the families that I know that want to do these things, you need a flexible work schedule, or you need somebody that you can hire to kind of help you get your children there. So there are a couple ways to do this. We also, I know of some homeschooling families where, Bev takes them on Mondays, and she has the pod with her, and she takes them to activities on Mondays. And then JoJo has them on Wednesdays, and she takes them to different activities on Wednesdays. And so it's kind of figuring out how you're going to organize your time, which might be outside of work hours, or it might be a flexible work hour. But it's also depending a lot on each other, and building connections too, and sharing, the opportunities. So in the homeschooling community, you kind of start to find your pod, and you work with each other and say, oh, we're all going to take this class next week. Great. Can you drive them? Sure. Thank you, and you're like, and then I'll make sure to teach the lit circle in a couple weeks, so it can become this really give and take experience, where even parents who are working long schedules can find a group that they fit in with, and then give back how they can. One of the things I'd like to say, and it's a tough point, but think about how much time we as parents are investing right now in reactionary, possibly. How much are we trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we control that? How can I make this work? How can I make that? When you choose to take it on proactively, it becomes a little easier, because now your palette and your canvas get bigger. So there are possibilities, and depending on which one works for you, it can be done. There are lots of blogs out there too about parents who work full time and how they do it.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm I'd love to see the middle school one because I have a middle schooler.
Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. I can jump onto middle school if we'd like, and then we can come back and circle back to each one if people have
Unless
specific
anybody else has a question, please share it in the chat if you'd like.
Excellent. Okay, so let me jump onto middle school. So we'll have some time then just to kind of flesh it out if there are specific questions. But I put together this middle school one. And our student, let's see, we've got a middle school student who is twice exceptional. He is autistic. He loves his deep dives. He's very detail oriented. He loves history, also has some anxiety, and that's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this child and how we can start. Middle school specifically was my core. So I love teaching middle school for years and years, especially gifted middle school students. And one of the things you hear a lot about in middle school is this is the opportunity and this is the time for kids to take chances and learn how to fail. Now, for some of our kids, that's really hard. Just being a perfectionist or failing in general can be painful. And so finding an opportunity, an environment, and space for a child who doesn't like to fail and try new things, to try a couple new things at their own pace, wherever that rung is going to fit in, is good. And so this gives us some flexibility to maybe try a gifted curriculum specifically for history and writing. If you are with the public school independent study, hold on to the IEP and see how you can use that for standardized testings that you still may need to do through the public school that you're with. Find out how you can get into gifted curriculum. So depending on which route you go, the one of the three that we talked about, you can still use an IEP and use it well. You might want to use a couple extra rungs, put those in there for executive functioning, or one of the things we talked about with my daughter was how could we start a study group? And she started a study group now based around history, and it was kind of fun. Theater classes might be enjoyable. This is a fun way for kids who don't even necessarily want to be in theater, but to take an opportunity to get them trying on new communication styles in a way that, hey, this is acting, but actually it's a really good opportunity to try on different communication styles and listen and watch and see what makes things, work out the way they do. So I think theater classes can be wonderful. Even online ones I've found some wonderful ones. Writers workshops might be interesting. A math tutor might be helpful. So let's say this particular student needs more of a remediation in math. Take that time. This is a time where now you can go back and review and review and review, because they might get that point and it might take 4 weeks, and then they get the next one in 1 week, and then you get to move on to the next one because your time frame is your own. And so using a tutor to help you get through a subject that might be difficult for you to teach your child is another way to go. Kind of hand it off and say, we really just do not communicate well over math. I love math and I do math and in my sleep. My child doesn't seem to understand. Could you help them? And it might be a wonderful way for you to hand it over. I had one of my families tell me that they handed it over to grandpa because grandpa did really well with it. And it was a wonderful opportunity actually for them to bond too. And so not only do you find your tutors somewhere maybe through one of the sites, but you can also find them, in your family and create these whole other opportunities. And all of a sudden you have a math tutor and grandpa gets to know your kid better than they ever thought over a subject they enjoy together. So there's all these possibilities. Once again, getting outdoors, hiking groups. There are several hiking groups in the Bay Area that are focused on homeschoolers, but also several of them open up to just kids who are interested in hiking during the day, and it's social distance, or they have a list of some of the wider paths and some of the easier paths to take, some of the less populated paths to take. And so once you start seeking this, you can get out there and start hiking maybe. And this could be another fun way to get some fresh air if you choose a middle school route that you want to start to make your own. So PSA, I had a question in there. What about math, whether it's high school or middle school? This is where you as a family would want to sit down and say, well, what are we doing math for? Why are we doing math? Is it because we want to get our child into college to study something for math? Well, then maybe we need to put some more sources behind it and look for more opportunities. Or is it just something right now that if we've got the basic bare minimum, let's stick with that and let it be, or skip it for a year, because there's way too much trauma around it. As a PSA, you can choose that. You can choose to skip it for a year, especially if you're going with, like, let's say, an independent study school and you've got an IEP. You can say, yep, they did a worksheet once a week. Here's your worksheet, and let it be. And don't continue to go back on it every single day if you don't need to. And that's something you can do. And I encourage families to find what they need. And we could talk a little bit more about that once we get.
Teresa, before you move on to the high school, there were a couple of questions that had come in related to middle school, and the folks who submitted those are on the call tonight. And you kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of the IEP.
Yeah.
And someone, Melissa, asked, once you leave public school for homeschool, do you lose your IEP for going back, or can you save it?
Well, I don't know if you can save it, quote unquote, and if there's anybody on here who wants to speak specifically to that. I've never had a family who tried to save it, and that's only because their child changed dramatically while they did the 2 or 3 years of homeschooling. And so when they came back to the table, they used the former IEP or the previous IEP as a jumping off point, but they weren't looking for the same things. And so, and every 3 years, it's not unusual for educational environments, depending on whether it's private or public, to want a reevaluation also. So you just might be in a very different place that you're not necessarily going to need that. I haven't had a family that switched around quite that quickly. So like 1 year to the next. So if anybody has experienced that, I would love to know, because I think that would be good to know. But my experience is usually the child has changed. And so it's a reference, but it's not the same. Does that kind of help it?
And I'm not an expert in this field at all. So if anyone on the chat knows more, feel free to weigh in. But I do know, like, when we moved our daughter from a public school to a private school, the public school had to follow up on her IEP for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Even though she was not enrolled there was some obligation on your public school district's behalf to follow that through. At some point that stopped, and I don't really know why, because we didn't pursue it. But, you know, it is important to keep that documentation up if you think you want accommodations for standardized testing. Or if you want to, you know, you really want to make sure before your child goes to college, if you're going to request college accommodations. So we can maybe talk about that more at the high school. But
right, yeah.
And another question that came in ahead of time about middle school is, you know, when you have a child that has high curiosity, especially, you know, a lot of these kids who are on the spectrum have just such great passion for things. And you want to start thinking about exposing them to potential career paths, to give them role models and stories and that sort of thing. And someone was asking, how do you help introduce that at this age?
And that's a great question. So I was just on a seminar call with Berlin Blank at the University of Iowa, and they were talking about career paths and how middle school, and I do some career counseling and some career working with our Twice Exceptional high school students also. Middle school is a great time to explore. And yes, I know a lot of students think they know what they want. And I'm not saying deny that to them, actually enjoy it. It was funny, we had one student who was very into baseball and memorized all of the stats and statistics. And it was like, oh my gosh, how can we do anything around baseball statistics? Because that's where this child was at. This is what they lived and breathed. That's what they did. And so as coaches and as mentors and as people working with him, we tried to figure out, like, what can we kind of show in through that lens, and public speaking through the lens of baseball statistics. Whether or not he would study different historical aspects and things like that happening through baseball. So those kind of things we kind of peppered through the lens of it. But no joke, this kid ended up somehow meeting a announcer for one of the baseball media things, and he was doing his thing and he was talking about how excited he was about baseball statistics, and the announcer said, you know what, I need to get you with my assistant because I'd love to hire you. You are a great resource. So even though this kid focused on it for 10, 15 years, he can do that for the rest of his life now because he found his niche. Nobody ever thought he would, or that it would not work out that way, but you never know. And so it's kind of trying to expose through the lens and then just letting it be.
Well, and another mom that has a middle schooler was noting that she already homeschools, and she'd like to know, how do you keep the child accountable for scheduling and time management and organization, especially because she has 2 other children and everyone has household things they have to do. And so, in middle school, you're trying to release some of that to the child more and more. So how do you kind of manage that in that environment?
Yeah, and that will work differently for each family, depending on how also how they kind of do the discipline and the way things work in their house. And so for one middle school family, I know that they don't get tech they don't get tech until after all of their schoolwork is done, and then they're allowed to have however much tech time they want as long as they've done their work and it's been done well. I know other families that have a window of time where it's no tech, and this is what school is. So from 10 to 3, find something academic to do and, accomplish what you need to during that time, because after that, you may have your free time and choose to do whatever with it. And so it depends on the dynamics of the family. I really recommend finding what works, and it's actually something that I'm studying right now, is finding what works for the child. And this is an executive functioning thing. This is finding the right kind of momentum without overwhelming, without stressing. So often we think that the pressure is going to be helpful, and it's not. And so knowing your child and creating a plan with them is something I would suggest starting with, and saying, okay, what can you do, bud? We're going to sit down and we're going to figure out, what do you want me to hold you accountable for? Because you know what I'm expecting, what are you expecting? And let's be reasonable, and that's one reason why I used to say I love teaching middle school, because you could start to have those conversations with them, and they were open to it sometimes. So start the conversation, find out what works, and find out in your family, how you're going to structure the give and take of earning and not earning, or maybe that's not a part of you.
Awesome. Those were our middle school questions for now. And then we may have some more in the general Q&A after we get through the high school.
Okay. All right. So let me go through the high school real quick. And we're doing pretty good on time. I hope that leaves us a good window. Okay, so our high school student, this is going to be our ADHD creative, out of the box thinker with humorous aspects. They love humor, they love science, specifically going towards animals and biology. Once again, high anxiety is not unusual, and especially working on executive functioning skills is going to be something that I would throw in this mix too. Most likely it's going to be helpful. High school is one where families start to think about whether or not there is a college path, whether or not they want one. I've worked with some, homeschooling and unschooling families that it didn't matter. If my child wants to go to college, great, we'll figure out how to get them there. And I have some that say, you know what, we're actually homeschooling because we would like to start college at 14. And that can be done too. So there's a lot of flexibility here, whether you are on a very intense academic track or just an academic track that follows the dreams of your child might be ready for college courses at 14 or 15. You never know, but you can find out when you start to do these things. Also, parents are asking, will the child be able to go into a college? Yes, I highly recommend that you research Each college that you're looking at beforehand, though, they will have information on what they need from you as a homeschooling parent, which, what do they need as far as transcripts? What do they need as far as examples? And one of the things that you really have an opportunity to do if you choose to homeschool for whatever part of high school is to make your child's high school transcripts, but more along the lines of their application, really stand out. This is where you can find out how your child shines. And then when they go to do the college application, they can talk about volunteering and why they chose to do it, or whatever it is that made them, unique, and find it and use it for that college experience. So let's say we've got this out-of-the-box thinker who wants to do some volunteering. Maybe he chose to do a stand-up routine for a senior retirement home. And on his college entrance, he's going to talk about in his essay what he chose to do to entertain senior citizens during his comedy sketch. And so it can be anything, but think about how out of the box that would put that unique application, and it might be fun for the child also, or the student also. This is, like I said, a really good time to think about portfolio development. If you have a child who is in the arts or creative in any way, I say exposure, 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 but then let them create and find ways for them to hold on to that. And it will all come together, and find the people to help it come together. There are companies and people out there that help students develop their own portfolio for college applications. And this can be done, and actually can be fun when you're in high school and you don't have the high school day to go through. You might have the high school curriculum to go through, but you don't have the set time of day because you chose to homeschool. And now you get to use this time to work on your portfolio pieces a little bit more. And so these are opportunities to keep track of those things. Definitely keep track of everything in high school. It will be important and it will be helpful. There are ways to keep track of those things. Another thing is one-on-one. So you might bring in some of the one-on-one schools. They have great lab facilities, or you have a child that really excels in writing and you want them to sit with a writer and an instructor that does well. This can be an opportunity where, it might not be your ability to keep up with them in the sciences, but we can take that and use that with a one-on-one school that can push them and help them succeed and help manage the science aspect of it. And they have the facilities and the labs to do that too. So it's possible now to look into one-on-one aspects, because a lot of them do high school, some do middle school. Dual enrollment is where a student, I shouldn't call them children anymore because they're headed into college, they can do courses at the local community college without enrolling in the community college, and sometimes get dual enrollment credits for it. Now, this is very specific to each college, to each community college, and to the courses. And so you're going to want to find out what transfers and what doesn't. So literally there are books out there, and I'll have to take a picture of this. I forgot to write it in the notes, but there are books out there. There are books written on this. This one actually was updated in 2018, so it's not too old. The author of it also has a blog that she does. I know families that have used her suggestions. It's called Homeschooling for College Credit. They've used her suggestions even if they don't homeschool, because what she does is shows how you can incorporate for some of our gifted students, some of our exceptional students. They're ready for a really challenging course. How can you incorporate that and make sure that it counts going forward? So there's literally books written on this topic and good resources for that. So look into dual enrollment or college credits. This is where I would start to bring in career exploration. I work with a company that I use as a tool. It's a great tool called Greenwood. and I use it for some of my clients, some of my high school students. I think it's fantastic. And it's a tool where we look, and it gives personality. It does the Myers-Briggs. It does all kinds of values. And then it gives you the top 100 careers based on your child's values and interests and personality and things like that. And then it gives the last 10 careers that they definitely shouldn't be in. Like, I had one student that shouldn't be a mortician, but he should go into broadcasting, and so it was kind of funny to sit down with a student and know what we knew from some of the career exploration you can start to do during this time, and that you can make space for. What I do with my high schoolers that I set plans for is we make a plan. We will do this career exploration tool. We'll sit down and we'll say, okay, it looks like you're headed towards animation, computer graphic animation, specifically gaming. Are you interested in virtual reality? Let's find some people who do virtual reality gaming. We are in a spectacular area to start to look for these kind of connections. And this goes back to that little green icon I had about resources. Who is going to be so helpful at this point in time. And then you just say, we got a chance to meet with somebody who does VR. And when we talked to them, we said, maybe VR isn't right for my son, but how about, do you know anybody that does the sketch before the actual animation gets done? They say, yeah, let me connect you with so-and-so. And so start to have these conversations and explore this with the time that you might be making, and take a class at the community college and explore it now too. So here we are again, just making space and time. And that's, high school is the time when you start to do that and create these mentorships, because you can start to flush this out before college, and you might have a good understanding that there's resources there for this. So yes, I would say career exploration usually after about 15 years old. Anything before that, I hesitate to put something in their mind that they hold on to and then don't let go of, and so this is an opportunity when you can start to say, okay, if we put this in your head and in your mind, what can it look like? So I had one teen who kind of fit this profile a little bit, and he was really involved in different gifted conferences or teen conferences, and this was national, and went on to some of the councils and decided to get involved as an organizer. This was a really great way, and it looked spectacular on his college entrance. And so there are opportunities to go even further with these things. Math tutors, once again, this might be an opportunity to say, we're going to bring it back down to its essentials, and you'll do algebra 1 for 2 years, because that's what we want to do, and that's what you need to do. And we need to finish out the college, the credits to get you to where you want to be by such and such. Let's plan it slow. And so you can do that. Maybe a business forums. Maybe you say, you've got some extra time here. You love animals. Why don't you go do a dog walking business? And those little things pop up. I have seen some amazing little entrepreneurial ideas come out of homeschoolers, and they're allowed and they have time to pursue them. And so it's not unusual for pro sports kids that are on track to do pro sports. They might homeschool because they have the time. But even just kids who are dreamers and thinkers, what would it be like if we gave them time to dream and think and then chase it for a little while? So this is an opportunity to take off that mandated move on, 45 minutes are over, your 50-minute class is over, move on, and fall into who knows where and what, track it and use it.
So Teresa, there are a few questions about high school, and I want to let everyone know we had originally said this session would end at 8:30, but I think you agreed you could stick around if we have more questions then. And so if people who want to stick around, we will keep going a little while longer, make sure a lot of the questions get answered. Kelly had asked, I think all that stuff for high school, again, and this is a common theme across everybody has this challenge, is that all looks really good. How do you think about finding a mentor who can manage all of it?
Yes, well, and And that's up to each family. So I have supported moms and parents who have chosen to do that, and I check in with them once a year or every 6 months, and that's what I do. That's my job, and I help them organize that. I have parents that specifically go with schools that do the independent study program so that they have that backbone following them, and then find out where they're going to stick in these exciting opportunities. And so then it's a time for me to sit down with them and say, okay, it looks like we can open up some time, and let's fight for this and back off on this and open up that. And it really is taking, like I said, the active stance of, we can control this situation. There will be things we need to react to, but how can we create a program that we have choices and it's working for us, and we're actively doing things towards a goal as opposed to reacting and that's not working. How do we make it work? You can hire, I know that there's a company, I'll have to get the specific name. We just worked on hiring a company that would help our freshman college student follow through and make sure he's registered for his classes, make sure that he's following and getting to his calendar in shape. So an executive functioning, like, private assistant that they hired for him. And so there are companies out there that can do that too, to that detail. And I just come in every once a year now and say, hey, are you getting where you want to go? And they help them get there. But most of the time it's the mom, it's the dad, and that's why I went to this slide. It takes time, and you want to decide, where are we going to put our time? And then I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm really not, but I've seen it really be worth it. I have seen kids change, whether they chose to homeschool for their entire career or for 2 or 3 years. I've seen it be worth it, and knowing that it's about, there are choices, and it's going to be this opportunity to embrace some of those.
Well, and I love the whole idea about hope, because I think a lot of families, you go down a path and you want the traditional school to work. And then when it starts to not work, and you can see that your child doesn't have that spark anymore, and you need something that would give you hope. I think the other key question that has come up a lot is, all these things sound really great too, or you could hire someone to do this, or you could do Fusion or Futures or School for Independent Learners, but who pays for all of that? So, and I know there are families that homeschool on tight budgets. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know if that's something you help people figure out as well, or if you have just a few words you could say about how people do that.
Sure. And homeschooling families notoriously are close budget watchers, and they oftentimes, when I first started working with homeschool families 7 years ago, I had 5 or 6 families coming together, and they would pay for me and my hour and a half, all 5 of them together, instead of one paying for me. And so it becomes this group effort of working together instead of taking it all on yourself. And I also have families that use college students. There are some amazing college students out there that are excited to mentor and to tutor in maths and things like that. And they're really inexpensive, and they're, wonderful to work with. Some of them might not be so good, but you can change. And one of the things this is about is, it's okay if something's not working. It's okay. Change it.
And then Teresa, do you have your contact information, like on the next slide or something? Do you want to put that up while we finish going through some of these other questions? I'm trying to pull out the ones, because some people will have more extensive questions, but I'm trying to pull out the ones that came in through the chat about high school. And Suzanne wanted to know about your opinion of the California high school proficiency exam. So that's an alternative to getting a homeschool diploma. And do you know of any families that have had students go that route?
You know what, let me, I'm going to actually share that slide one more time. So do I know any families that have gone that route? I don't think that I do, actually. I got to move things over real quick. I was hoping to have a couple of my high school families on here. I don't know. I'm going to look through real quick and see if I can tap anybody, have any high school families that can talk to that. Is there a high school family that can talk to that? Because I haven't had that option. Does anybody have any opinions on that?
I mean, I really hadn't even heard of it myself until I think Yael will correct me if I'm wrong. We had a conversation with the founder of Big Minds Unschool, and she mentioned it as an approach that some of their graduates have taken so that they don't have to, reintegrate back into a more traditional or highly competitive environment, high school environment, and they were ready for it. And so it just really, they were able to take that and then actually kind of do what you're talking about in terms of homeschooling, almost like gap years in high school to just pursue their passions. And she seemed to think that that was a better route than a GED.
Got it. Okay.
I don't know why, and I can't, I am not a doctor. I only playing one on TV when I give that advice.
Yeah, no, and it's all changing. I think it's fascinating, and it's different state by state. So I think it's fascinating, the GED versus this proficiency specific to California, and whether or not that's going to look good depending on which college you're applying for too. So what is your hope for getting that specific credential, academic, progress or milestone or achievement is based on, are you looking to go to Stanford next, or are you looking to join your community college next? And what do they want? And that's going to be different for each one also. So like I said, sometimes you can get into a community college without that entrance or the GED because you're just enrolling to one or two classes instead of becoming a student. And so it depends on what you're hoping to accomplish after that, and whether or not one looks better than the other. Like I said, I would love to know if anybody has any opinions on that, and I'd be curious to see what their track is and what they're hoping to accomplish.
And then Jane wanted to know if there are any independent charters that don't give grades in high school that you know of.
Not that I can think of. That's a good question. I would love to know. And it's funny because for every possibility, there are 101 schools now. And so if somebody knows that, I would love to know. I don't know of one. All of the independent schools I know have at least a pass-fail. And most likely they're trying to keep track of a graded GPA for you of some kind. How you get there is a choice, but the fact that you probably are being tracked with something is not unusual, especially for a public school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, I saw a lot of questions in the questions that we had from people that registered about moving back and forth between homeschooling and traditional schools. How many years might people homeschool? How easy is it to come back in?
Yeah, now that is also different. And I have had many families, what I used to call would be the reactionary homeschool family, which would be, we have to make this change now. It's not working. We got them out. And that was the pull and grab and start over kind of thing. And so usually families like that, I would encourage to take time to deschool, to find a way out of that trauma. And especially with I want to, let families know, I've worked with gifted students and twice exceptional students for many years, and they're flexible and resilient in many ways, and in the ways that they're not, nurture the heck out of it. And so it might be that they're having a difficult time emotionally and socially. Nurture the heck out of that, and you know what? Just trickle in some science here and there, and then maybe next year, that's all you're going to be doing, is like they all of a sudden became a biologist and decided to be, and so depending on each family, why they're doing that and what they need from it, I've seen it be usually 2 years. If they try to jump right back into the public school, it oftentimes repeats. There hasn't been enough healing. There hasn't been enough growth. There hasn't been that change quite yet. And so usually 2 to 3 years. I have one family that I know, they did some traditional school. They pulled out, they homeschooled around 2nd or 3rd grade. And then the daughter was ready for middle school. And I saw her go from literally a child who had their head down on the table and wouldn't speak for the first class, for the first probably entire class, like 6 months that she was in my classes, to a child that would get up and give lectures 2 years later. She was ready for middle school. She knew what she was good at and she wanted to talk about it. It was like night and day, but this child needed space and time to do that. And so I've seen it happen where, yes, they do come out of the public school, give it time, be aware that what you first try isn't going to work, and that's okay. I can remember I still try different curriculums. I try different things all the time. And I can remember, like, specifically with an exceptional student, you're going to find, for example, I did a program with my son who is severely dyslexic, and he needed to read all of it. And I could not leave his side because so much of it was reading based. And I was like, oh my gosh, this one's not going to work, so let's choose a different one. And then I found another one that I loved, reading based, but I decided, it was worth it. It did deep dives enough, and we could do discussions instead of writing. And so you got to give it time to try, fail, succeed. And all the time you're doing that, your child's learning how to do that through you and with you. And so that's an extremely valuable experience too, is, showing your child how, this didn't work out, let's try something new, and it's okay. And so it can be valuable. I say give it time. And then when you look to go back, have the information ready of what were the things that you covered. Some schools are going to want to know. Some schools will ask you, just like any other going to a middle school, and you guys can speak to this too. When you apply to some middle schools in the Bay Area, they want a lot of information. And so know that you're going to come at that as a homeschooler, and this is what we did, and this is how I can give you that information. So be aware of what you're thinking to do next, because it's possible to go back, even, for middle school or high school. Just keep track of it, and there are ways to do that.
Teresa, I think another question that kind of comes up and it across a lot of people is, how do you know to pull the cord? Like, we had a question that came in from a parent who has a high schooler who has dysgraphia and anxiety, and we have a lot of people who, when maybe wish they'd done this younger, when their kids were younger. And so maybe you can also speak to, like, at the different ages, but, how do you weigh that value of, like, continuing to advocate with your district for the changes you need versus just being like, we're moving on,
Yeah. And I am a teacher. That's how I started. I know what it's like to be a teacher. I know what it's like to be in a public and private classroom. It's tough. And I've had many people wonder, how could I take my child out of school when I was a teacher? I mean, that's like, isn't that what you do? And isn't that what you support? It came to the point for me, and what I've seen with other families, and I've explained it like this. If the house was burning down, you'd take your child out, right? If it was a situation where it's not healthy, it's not working, can I remove this, do some healing, put the fires out? There's still possibilities of rebuilding that house, maybe, but does my child need to come out of there? Is their well-being at risk? And do I have a priority that I can do that now? Not every family can do this. And I have said over and over again, homeschooling is a gift. It is such a gift. And I've seen families make it work. Like I said, both parents are working. They're tech crazy job working, and they'll figure out how to pass kids off and to make it work. And it's a gift. Their child knows that they've been given this opportunity and they embrace it. And so does the family. It's not accessible for everybody, but I've seen some amazing ways to make it work. I would say just really, what's going to happen if you don't? What's going to happen if this continues again? And what could happen if we chose another path? You're not going to set your child back. I honestly can't say that I've necessarily seen that. So many people are worried that they're going to bring their child home and it's just they're going to get behind a year or two. And the way that they usually grow, even if it's not academically, even if they just kind of stay there and they maintain or go a little bit above or grade level or whatever, they usually hang in there. But the ways they've healed and gotten stronger would not have happened in the classroom with that space and that time. And so it really is that first conversation when I have with parents, what are your priorities? We can figure out how to make this work. And oftentimes it's how can we do this? We got to make some change. And so there are choices. I want everybody to know, even if it's not to pull out and homeschool, there are other choices.
That's what I wanted to ask. I think Jane brought this up too, is we had a lot of questions about, are there any hybrid solutions? Can they be partly in public school, but just get pulled out for math because that's where they need extra help or acceleration or whatever it is?
Yeah. So I think you would have to find that with one of the independent schools, the independent public school programs. And there are places like Connections Academy that have been doing distance learning or virtual learning for 20 some years. They've got a program that's stellar. You can do your high school through it and so on and so forth. But whether or not you can bypass their curriculum, probably not. So if you want to be able to find that hybrid, you're going to have to find a specific school that does that. I don't know of one in the Bay Area, but I know that they're changing. I know they're changing as we are speaking. I'd say first call, if you're interested, call your public school, call your local school district and talk to them about this. I have heard of some really exciting things happening locally. I used to know that these things were happening up in Portland and up in Washington and areas like that, and I'm starting to hear it here. So there's really exciting hope. So call, talk about it, figure it out, because there are possibilities. It's being done around the country. So I'm hoping it'll show up here soon. If anybody knows of one, let me know, because that would be wonderful.
So if there are more specific questions, you can email, like some of these more specific questions you might want to email to Teresa. I don't know if you'll be able to go into as much detail, Teresa, as you might like, but apps or websites that are story-based or exploratory and immersive for elementary math and reading. So something different than Khan Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're getting some questions about that, like recommendations for science lovers in high school, like any websites or resources. I mean, yeah.
Wonderful. And you and I had talked, Callie, about possibly a blog after this.
That's what I was just thinking.
Those might be fun things to kind of put into a resource blog or something that we could have time to sit down and look at together. Because once again, I would say, okay, a science-based app, is this something you want to do actively at home, like the Mel Science, and that's where they send you this kit and literally your kid is working with fire and chemicals and doing all kinds of exciting things? Or is this something that you want it to be all online and they get to watch this great experience and think about it and discuss it with? So there's so many other questions that I would ask in regards to that. But if they have details, put it in the chat and maybe we could put together a blog or something around those ideas. And the details help, because with our twice exceptional students, that's, I hate to say it, but the devil's in the details. That's where we always get caught up. It sounds great until we throw in block, and then it's like, oh, that's right. They're not going to be able to sit still for 5 minutes. So we need something that breaks it up easily. So,
Yeah. There's somebody else, that was asking about part groups and reading specialists for elementary age. So yes, I think we can go back through the chat and probably pull out a few key things like that. And I think a blog.
I would love that. Yeah. And there are reading specialists in the area. I know of one specifically who also homeschools her son, and she has a small business that she does the Orton Gillingham and Barton reading through. And so I'd hope to wrangle her up and say, share your thoughts, and she could give you homeschooling ideas and help you with these reading. Because what I've found is that it works well when you have a partnership with your specialist. So when you go home, you guys are doing the same thing. So,
I think a big question I've always had about homeschooling that I imagine some other people do is, how do you maintain your relationship with your child? Like, how, I think that's probably what always has kept us from homeschooling, because I think I am really bought into the gift of time that you are giving your child, but your family, like, to not be arguing about what's happening at school anymore, and that ability to give them I have always had this feeling like my children are alive today. Like, shouldn't their time be used well today? Like, I want my time to be used well. They're alive today. Shouldn't their time be used well? But I never pulled, went all in on it, because I just wasn't sure we could get along. And I'm wondering what your advice is for people who are considering it, but maybe that's holding them back.
Well, and one of the things that I think is very important is to have the buy-in with the child. It is such a partnership, and it's going in it and talking about it with your child and as your student, and saying, would you be willing to do this? Are you interested in this? These are the possible things that we can do with an opportunity like this. But this is me as mom, what I'm going to need from this. And this is me as an educator, what I need to help you through this. What would you need if you wanted to make this happen? And I have families that, like I said, they'll sit around and do their work at 6 or 7 o'clock at night until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, because that's when they realized they could be a family and do it together. They were on their own during the day and they were fine with that. But when it was 7 or 8 o'clock at night, they all sat down and focused on being a student to get ready for tomorrow. And so it was finding a pattern in the family, but talking about it beforehand. You have to have the buy-in, and it's really hard to homeschool a kid that doesn't want to be homeschooled, and that's when you need to kind of find whether or not that's the right choice. Is making a kid do anything they don't want to do is terrible, let alone making them do it all day long. So, but I've seen really receptive conversations around, oh, okay, well, then maybe I would do this if we could do that, and kids kind of start to open up, and they're like, oh, if that's what that means, then maybe I do want to, I always say, don't use homeschooling as leverage, though. Like, I'm going to take this away from you if you don't do this. That's not what it's for. It's about really working on the partnership dynamic of it, and that each one of you know that it's not all about me, it's not all about you. This is something we've got to create together. So
I want to thank you so much, Teresa. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of the key themes that came in, as well as the specific questions. And so I think we can go ahead and wrap things up. And I just first want to thank you for taking the time to share so many of your insights with us tonight and give people so many things to think about. And I also put in the chat the link to, actually, I don't think I actually put it as a link. Maybe Elle will do that for me, to our website at realpaloalto.org. If anyone wants to sign up for our Google group, that's the best way to learn about our upcoming events and to see a blog post from Teresa that will have your specific questions. We will email that out to our group too. And we are going to be hosting a bunch of other events. We're hosting small group conversations in the first quarter of this year on what the future of school looks like. And then we have a panel on self-advocacy coming up in March, and a fireside chat with Melanie Hayes, who's the founder of Big Minds Unschool, in April. So we have some great things that are coming up, and we'd love everyone to join and be able to also see the recording of tonight if you need to go back and refer to anything. So thank you so much. And anyone who wants is welcome to turn on their camera now, and Teresa can close out her screen sharing and you can say goodbye, and we can at least see each other a little for a moment.
Thank you for having me. And as I was mentioning, there are so many possibilities. I don't know them all, and I'm excited about learning new ones. So if anybody wants to share, I would love to hear it too.
It's just good to see your all's faces. I'm looking forward to the time we can actually, for those of us who are in the Bay Area, get together and sit and talk and have wine and cheese and chocolate, and that'll be a good day. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks.
Hello. You're here to the bitter end.
I
The
made it. Well,
sweet end.
I migrated down to the kitchen, but I hung in there.